Okay, welcome you two. It's good to see you here tonight again. I actually logged in a little late because I did have my meeting times mixed up between today and tomorrow's go-to sessions because I have a few classes I'm managing, but hopefully we didn't miss anyone that may have logged in earlier. This is week 1 of Aesthetics and Theory of Communication. Hope you're both doing well tonight. So this course is a little bit unusual in the MCVS program in that it isn't dealing with any single discipline, like you have classes later on that are digital video or graphic design or web design. This is really a foundations course, much like the introduction course or the new media tools, where you're really getting some essential knowledge and skills that will apply to many different later concepts. So I always ask the question when I start this first lecture, and that is, what is aesthetics? What does that word mean to you? Okay, and Stacey says the makeup. You mean the makeup in the sense of sort of what goes into creating a particular image or look? Okay. Terrence, do you have any thoughts or any ideas on what the word aesthetics means and what definitions you might apply to that? The design of something. Okay. Aesthetics, really, the term is used in a lot of different ways in everyday life. You might hear it used to describe a particular style or look, like a southwestern aesthetic, like the vase that's on the screen, or sometimes there's sort of the industrial aesthetic and that sort of thing where it's used very casually in that sense. Aesthetics actually originates from philosophy, particularly the philosophy of art, where it was dealing with the appreciation and creation of beauty. So it was an exploration of what people find beautiful, because clearly different people find different things visually appealing. The two paintings on the screen right now are two examples. Those are one on the left is a Jackson Pollock painting, which you see is just very abstract and pretty wild in its composition, whereas the one on the right is a Claude Monet painting that's much more easily accessible, much more recognizable. But both of these are considered great works of art. But in our modern day media world that we're going to deal with, we need something more concrete, more of a working definition that we can build upon. And that's where applied media aesthetics comes in. And this is more of a modern concept. And in this case, the definition becomes the process in which we examine a number of media elements. So there's that makeup of the media, how they interact, and our perceptual reactions to them. So if you look at those two definitions, I'm going to go back one. Traditionally, we were dealing specifically with appreciation of beauty. Now we're dealing with perceptual reactions, and that's a big difference. It's become much more broad in scope, because perceptual reactions can be positive, they can be negative, they can be indifferent. Beauty is a perceptual reaction, but so can be revulsion or sadness as well. because all of these different reactions now matter to us as media professionals. If you think about those, the Sarah McLachlan SPCA commercials with the sad puppies and the music playing that really tugs at your heartstrings, they are making use of a perceptual reaction to evoke a specific response. And this is something that is very commonly used in media today and very useful if we understand how we can combine those media elements in order to evoke a specific reaction. We can better, more effectively deliver our message to the audience. And so that's what this class is really going to be about, is exploring a few different factors, different media elements, and how we can combine those to effectively evoke a perceptual reaction in our audience. Do you have any comments or questions so far? Okay, so as you could probably guess, we're going to be dealing really heavily with visual media. And of course, the media world involves more than just the visual. There's also audio, and as well as print, and print including digital, like website media that involves printed content. But increasingly, the visual side plays a part as digital video and streaming video and online content takes on a much more richer format. So that's going to be our focus for this month. As you would see in your readings for this week, in the Aesthetics for Dummies chapter in particular, the writer defines aesthetics as having 3 layers. They're the content, and that's what this object is all about. And the second is the form. It's how it's all put together, or how it's embodied. And associations, and that is why it matters to the audience or the beholder. We're going to explore each of these layers through the topics this month. The content layer is your subject matter. Oftentimes in a media project, that's going to be a given. So if you're assigned to create, say, marketing material for a hotel chain, then your subject is going to be that hotel chain. Or if you're doing a documentary on homelessness, then homelessness is your content. So a lot of times that's pretty much set for you or defined by the project itself. You have much more control over the form, how you're going to approach that topic. And this can be the type of media you choose, if it's going to be still imagery or digital video. All of those play a part in how it's going to be embodied. We're going to address this layer of aesthetics in week 2 and week 3 through study of color theory in week 2, and as well as composition, which is that what Stacy mentioned, how it's made up, how it's put together, how you can emphasize certain parts of an image over others and direct your viewer's attention in specific ways. And associations is a little tougher. This is what this subject means to your audience. And we're all individuals and have different experiences and different thoughts on each topic. So a lot of this is outside of our hands as media designers, but we can predict this in some ways and try to design our media in a way that appeals to what we know about our audience in order to evoke those reactions. And we'll address this in week 1, this week, in emotional design, which you're already diving into, and then in week 2 through color psychology, which is the counterpart to color theory, where color theory is more of the formal study of how colors interact with one another and kind of the visual impressions they can create. Color psychology is what the colors mean to us, what symbolism or cultural significance different colors carry. So that's kind of a breakdown of our month. That's what we're going to explore. Oops, let me go back. So I'm going to dive into emotional design, which is our week 1 topic. And I'm going to show you a set of advertisements. These are from the We Love Ad website. But what I want you to do is, as I show each of these, just sort of quickly share your impression. What thoughts or feelings do these evoke? And kind of try to share your initial immediate impressions before you're able to take time to kind of explore and consider what these any deeper meaning. Okay, here we go. Here's our first one. And Stacy's first immediate impression was, oh my. What are some, okay, and Terrence was amused by this one. And now that you've had a moment to look at it, what is the message that the ad is trying to communicate? Okay, fathers are capable with Huggies. Good. And yeah, I think that Huggies can handle the big messes. And yeah, I think that's perhaps both of those are true, especially the emphasizing that Huggies can handle the big messes. And yeah, they were definitely going for amusement and using humor in this case. And there's kind of an immediate oh my reaction that's certainly eye-catching. Let's go to the next one. Intrigue. Okay. So you felt this was pretty bold and creative. Did it take you a second in looking at this to figure out exactly what you were seeing there? Yeah. Okay, yeah, and this one uses, as you said, very creative visuals that kind of make you pause for a second and consider what the heck this is that you're looking at. And as you said, it's a bit of a bold statement, but uses that sort of odd visual to really capture your attention. Here's our third one. Was confused in relation to, okay, yeah. And this is one that certainly, first of all, it's a rather absurd situation, because I can guarantee you that if you went to where these purses were manufactured, you would not see this scene taking place. But they are most definitely leveraging perceptual reactions, in this case using the idea of sex appeal with these very muscular models making the cutting the leather and shaping the leather in this case. So something that's not at all uncommon in advertising. And the last one. Terrence had a feeling of sadness, very sad. And it's that child's face that immediately catches your attention, isn't it? And sort of the shock of seeing this rather violent-looking act being carried out on a child, and then the hand. Okay. And the hand that's composed of words is sort of something that you come to realize. Well, you come to realize that it is made up of words and not an actual physical hand, and that's and it is carrying the message about verbal abuse. But they really leverage that that feeling of empathy that we have on seeing that sad face in this shocking scene, in order to really pull us into this message. All right, good. So these are just a few examples I wanted to put up before I really got into the topic of emotional design, just to show examples and a variety of examples of how different levels of emotion can be used to support different types of messages in different ways. Ultimately, the purpose is to make it matter to your viewer. Oh, I did have one more. I'm going to skip that one because it's kind of boring. Clearly, there are perhaps an infinite number of possible perceptual reactions. We have a wide array of human emotions that we might experience. And as media creators, we really can't easily read the mind of each individual audience member and predict how they're going to react to any given product or advertisement or piece of media, even though some of the Facebook ads seem to be trying to do that. But it's a really daunting task without that kind of big data. But we do have a model that makes it a little bit easier for us to work with that idea, and that's the emotional design model created by Donald Norman. This isn't necessarily an industry standard model that you wouldn't go into an ad agency and hear them talking about reflective design or behavioral design, but it makes it easier to organize ideas and more easily target how we want our audience to react. Basically, Donald Norman is a writer, and he's written a couple of books, but one of his more recent ones was Emotional Design: Why We Love or Hate Everyday Things. And he really focused on physical products like tea kettles or bottles and packaging and so forth. But this easily translates to media creation as well. And he defined 3 different levels of emotion, going from really basic fundamental instincts up to really higher level thinking and reflection. The visceral level is that very basic level. And this, the word visceral comes from viscera, which refers to your guts, your actual insides. And so this is literally gut reactions. And so it's instinctive gut responses. It's pre-conscious, and that means you react before you have time to think. Maybe it's kind of feeling repulsed, or maybe it's that hair on the back of your neck, raising up, or just a feeling of unease, or a feeling of attraction, or seeing really delicious looking food and your mouth starts watering, that sort of Pavlov's dog kind of response. these are all based on sensory experiences. So it's you see something, you hear or experience something, and you have a physical reaction to it. A little bit higher up is behavioral, and this is these are things that we've learned to appreciate or learned to respond to, things that we recognize as being beneficial or valuable in some way, more in the short term, so things that kind of are beneficial to us right now. It serves a specific purpose. They can be unconscious reactions because they're usually things that are really ingrained in us that we've worked with or had in our lives to such an extent that we really don't think about it anymore. And again, based on practical needs and immediate benefits. And I'm going to look at some examples of this, of each of these in a minute, just to clarify what they mean. And then reflective design. This is where our higher order thinking, or that frontal lobe that we have as human beings, comes into play. It's our ability to think rationally, to problem solve, to have memories and experiences that we can draw from. This is based on rational thought and is a conscious interpretation of emotions. So let's look at visceral design. And I mentioned that this is a physical reaction before you're even consciously aware of the stimuli. There was some research done that showed that snakes in particular can evoke a fight or flight reaction in people before they're even consciously aware there's a snake in their environment. So your senses have picked up on this, and your very basic brain back there is that the hippocampus has responded to this, has gone into survival mode before your frontal lobe has really been notified. And then it becomes aware there's a snake right there, and I need to get out of here, but your body's already reacting. That's an example of a visceral level emotion. And the designs you see on this page have leveraged that idea. They've really paired this idea of the danger of electrical shock with some predatory animals that a lot of people have phobias of. The idea there is that they can take advantage of that natural tendency to react to these animals to reinforce this message, this warning of danger. Okay, good. And that's one aspect of the visceral level. There's a lot of different things that fall under the visceral umbrella, because this is based on instincts, and we have many different instinctive reactions. Keeping with the theme of electric sockets, what do you see when you look at this image? Okay, there's angry sockets. And also surprise sockets. Yeah, I usually see anger in the ones on the left, kind of the darker gray color, and more surprise or maybe fear in the ones on the right. And it's interesting, and this is a very telling phenomenon, that we can look at these and sense emotions in them, even though this is an inanimate object and really was not intended to be emotional at all. But it's our tendency to apply emotions to what we're seeing, especially when we see something resembling a face. And this comes from what's actually called mirror neurons in our brain. That give us the tendency to reflect emotions back when we see them expressed in others. And you see this in examples like this, where there's an expression of surprise, and we see that and we internalize that. We know what that emotion is. And if you think about where this comes from, when we're newborn babies, we learn expressions from our parents, from our mother and father and other adults that are around us, by modeling their expressions. And this becomes a fundamental part of our nature. We understand when emotions are expressed and what they mean. And while we don't continue to mimic those expressions, that idea does stick with us into adulthood. And so when we are able to see those emotions expressed and understand them and feel them in ourselves, feel that person's sadness or joy or sentimentality. So this is our natural empathic instincts, or tendency towards empathy. And that is something that also falls under that visceral umbrella of responses. Typically, if you want somebody to feel a particular emotion, then show them that emotion. Just like those Sarah McLachlan SPCA commercials. You see those sad puppies and you feel sad for them. And the music certainly helps in that regard. And another facet of visceral design. What do you see when you look at this? And I won't make you answer that question. But the idea of sex appeal is also a visceral level component. And it's something that is pretty widely used in especially advertising, but also in TV and movies. And it is an effective attention getter. This is actually someone's feet, but they're arranged and photographed in a way that's very suggestive of a female figure. And down here in the tiny print, it says Sexy Heels by Samantha. So the little product is almost secondary to this image. And so this is one of the more powerful visceral level factors. And in fact, going back to this man-crafted advertisement, you see this appear in places that it really doesn't make sense to be there, like these guys making purses, or in advertisements for Burger King or McDonald's. It's kind of absurd to think about that being the case, but it works and it's attention getting, and so they make use of that sex appeal for that purpose. And also, just sort of a catch-all component of the visceral level is any kind of physical thrills or even psychological thrills. Like in this case, this is a little bit over the top, but a runner riding on a cheetah, riding on a rocket is kind of really emphasizing the point, but any kind of ideas of physical excitement. There was somebody in their exploration activity had one of a rodeo rider that was on a bull that was really very action-packed, and that's sort of an example of that as well. What these all have in common, though, again, is that they're things that give you a reaction of some kind that you don't have to think about. It just sort of happens. It evokes a response from you. Any questions on any of the visceral level aspects of emotional design? Okay. Good. Okay, and yeah, and what you'll see, and you'll see this more and more, is that these levels of emotional design are used together. They very rarely appear on their own. Occasionally you'll see an advertisement or even a TV program that really relies heavily on sex appeal or something along those lines, but very rarely is there nothing else to it. So you'll start seeing as we go along that the levels really complement one another in different ways. So now we're at the behavioral level, and this is a sort of a very stereotypical example of a behavioral level advertisement. And how do you see the emphasis change in this case? Okay, there's no initial feelings. And yeah, that's basically what it is. It's emphasizing information rather than experiences, sensory experiences. You still have sort of an attractive model here, but she's covered up pretty well and really not the main emphasis of the message. And it's more about the uses, right? It's more about the features of this product. The focus is on on the feature that's available through AT&T's network that lets you talk and surf the web at the same time. And again, I think this is probably getting a little bit dated now because most smartphones that I've used you can do this anyway. But at the time, this was an innovation. There were somebody in their exploration activity had another one of the ads from this series as well, and this is pretty textbook. This is what the behavioral level is all about. It'll make your job easier. It says it right there in bold letters. That's the benefit that it has to offer, and here's the tool that will do that job. There's not a lot of other sensory stimuli in this. It's very gray and grungy looking, which is a aesthetic unto itself, but really the focus is on the tool and the fact that it'll make your life easier. And this is a car ad, kind of along the same lines. Its emphasis is not on the sportiness of the car or even the engine itself, but how practical it is in cargo space. But one thing that I do want to say is that behavioral level designs don't always have to be bland or boring. They can make clever use of imagery. In this case, they're using a pattern of hands that has one that's different from the rest and it stands out. Yeah, and that's actually a factor. Keep that in mind in week 3 when we talk about composition. That kind of difference, that contrast in a pattern is one of the factors for creating emphasis. But in this case, we're looking at the emotional design, and really the fact the focus is on the effectiveness of the soap, lava, but you see a little bit of implied sex appeal here as well. All the guys at the garage wonder why Hank gets the girl. So it's that one that the guy that uses this soap that can get the cleanest has that little bit of status. And some more creative use of imagery to support a visceral or a behavioral level message. Here, in both cases, the emphasis is on the storage capacity of the hard drive, but you have these rather absurd images conveying that idea or supporting that idea. The size of the musical instrument as a metaphor for the number of songs that can be stored, and popcorn representing the movies. So that's behavioral level, and really I don't see a lot of behavioral level aspects playing a part outside of advertising. The emotional design is relevant in all types of media, but behavioral in particular really applies itself well to advertising because it emphasizes the benefits of a product. Something I didn't mention that I also kind of put under the behavioral umbrella is the idea of being of fandom, or being a fan of something, or being an enthusiast of something in particular. Like if you're a football enthusiast, or even say a Doctor Who fan or something like that, if you see the products or symbols that represent that particular thing that you feel enthusiastic for, that's also would be a behavioral level response, because it's not something that's instinctual, of course. So we've learned to appreciate these things, but that is also similar to these behavioral level reactions. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. And last, there's the reflective level, and this is, as I said earlier, the level at which we put a lot of our more complex thought and consideration and problem solving and memory into. And this is a pretty typical example of reflective level. You see the tagline there. The title is Fishing with Dad, and the quote, "Nothing happened, and yet everything happened." And so really playing up that idea of sentimentality, of quality time with Dad, and these memories of these times together. And there's more information down here, but we get that initial image and that initial little message, and it really conveys that sentimental idea. And we can get into the fine details after the fact, but that initial impression is already given. So you see the difference there. It's not anything suggestive or exciting, in the way of thrill ride, and it's not something that's immediately practically beneficial like a practical tool. It is focused on our feelings of sentimentality. And this one that we've seen earlier as well. The message there is start music, end war. And they've used this very complex visual metaphor to represent that idea. They've turned this weapon, the AK-47, into a musical instrument. And this is supporting the International Street Musicians Day, so it is an effort to focus on the arts as a way of preventing conflict, and I'm not sure how they would go about that, but that's what they're conveying in this very simple ad design. And I'll let you take a look at this one for a second, because it takes a minute to kind of settle in what you're seeing here. Yeah, it's kind of creepy. You see those eyes peering out from the woven fabric. And there's the slogan down here, or the tagline is, "Find out what's behind the clothes you buy." So there's these there's children's faces back there, and it's intended to raise awareness about child labor. And trying to read this small print down there, in human rights. So really focusing on the existence of sweatshops and creation of clothing. Here's another one that takes some time to kind of consider. It's not immediately obvious in the imagery. noticing that some of these reflective level examples are a little bit dark. So what you see, though, if you think of the previous one and this example here, is the emphasis on long-term consequences and really big picture issues. And yeah, this is a powerful message. This is the message on, for those listening to the archive, the message on the tattoo is I hit and killed the Browns, and it gives the date, and the tagline at the bottom is the consequences stay with you forever if you drink, don't drive. So yeah, really, really powerful message, and that idea of the tattoo, which is a permanent mark, as a metaphor for the permanent trauma of having killed someone in a drunk driving accident. So really big picture topics, really heavy and important issues. And there are other issues that might fall under the reflective level. I had one that I actually removed because I really didn't like the ad that I had, but issues of social status. And I know in the assignment, social status was mentioned as a visceral level component, and there's a little bit of overlap there. But the idea of success in life and quality of life is very much a reflective level component. Social status as a visceral level component would be more like almost like what you'd see kind of think of a pack of wolves and how they determine their pecking order with the alpha at the top and so on. These things happen in more of a natural way with kind of the leaders emerging. Sometimes you might see this in a public high school as well, sadly, but that would be where the social status aspect from a visceral standpoint would come into play. And Stacy, I saw your comment about there being a thin line between visceral and reflective. There's a pretty strong distinction, and the distinction is whether you have to think about it to interpret the meaning, or if you have an immediate reaction. So things that are shocking or suggestive or visually exciting would be more visceral. Things that you kind of have to really ponder and think about the meaning would be more reflective. But again, sometimes they might use visceral level imagery and pair that with a reflective level message. So this is a little bit in that territory, but so if you see an image that's really shocking, that just really causes that gut reaction, and then you see the verbal message expressing something like a deeper issue that's related to that, yeah, then definitely you would see that. And you can see there are examples of all three working together as well, but those are more rare. But what I really like for you to do is start becoming aware of these things and kind of critiquing the media that you experience, whether it's commercials on TV or billboards out on the road or what have you, and seeing how these different components work together, and kind of reverse engineering it in your mind and start seeing, asking yourself, well, why did the designer include that particular image? How does that support this particular message? And by developing that kind of critical mindset, you can become more aware in your own work as well, more informed. Did you have any questions or thoughts that you wanted to share on any of these, the three levels of emotional design, or how they might interact with one another? Okay. So ultimately, why this matters is that as media creators or even media strategists, even if you're the person doing the planning and you have a team of designers working with you, the idea here is that you want to try to plan the impression that you want to make before any media is created, before the hand touches the mouse to create any media or the camera is picked up. To consider, well, how do I want to reach my audience? What impression do I want to evoke? And how do I best go about connecting with them? And if you know who your audience is, which should be your first step in any kind of project, is knowing who you're communicating with, then you can start to think about which of these levels you might best approach that project at. What kind of instinctive or emotional connection you can create, and what imagery will be best used to create that impression. So this is very much sort of that creative director or media strategist level component. In this week's analysis assignment, which will be your next assignment for the course, you're going to review a piece of media, which is actually the Chipotle Scarecrow commercial. You may have seen that in a previous class. And you're going to kind of pick it apart, looking for some of these factors at all three levels. And I will go ahead and say that yes, all three levels are present in that commercial. So that's a bit of a spoiler. So really focus on some of the factors we've talked about tonight and others that you might see as relevant. One thing that I do want to say about the analysis activities, first of all, be very thorough in expressing your ideas and describing what you observe. So don't try not to give short or one-sentence answers, but really describe examples from the media piece that you've looked at. And also, what I'm looking for when I grade those is not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but that you understand the concept. So if I see that you have a pretty good understanding of what visceral design is and have a pretty good understanding of what reflective design is, even if you don't point out the same factors that I might have pointed out, then you'll still do well. Oh, I forgot that the slide was here. This is reinforcing that idea of the creative direction and making those choices up front. This is actually an ad that you'll get to know pretty well because it's our week 2 and week 3 analysis example. But in this case, the designer has taken this theme and we'll find your ideas and we'll make them famous, which is actually the slogan for this particular ad campaign. And instead of taking a more direct approach at tackling that idea of making your ideas famous, they've taken more of a suspense thriller style design. And so once they decided on that impression that they wanted to create, then they can go about selecting the verbal and visual components that support that. So they use the "you cannot hide it" slogan. That's very ominous and a little bit threatening. And select that imagery to support that. The fearful young man with the face that, again, that's that sense of empathy we have, expressions of emotion, and the very ominous, shadowy figure coming down the stairs. So that was just a quick look at how that would play out. So that was my presentation for the week 1. I appreciate you joining me and bearing with me through the lecture. If you do have any questions, let me know. You can speak up now, or you can shoot me an email later if anything comes to mind. But if you're all set, then I'm happy to adjourn for the evening and let you go on with your night.